Hello, in this video I'm going to share my strategy for winning the game of Gin Rummy. This is a great game for two players. It's basically a race between you and the opponent to form groups and sequences in your hand, and you get points based on what cards your opponent has at the end that aren't part of a group or sequence. Ideally, you want to go out so quickly that your opponent has a lot of leftover cards and you get points for all their leftovers. And like I said, I've come up with a strategy that is pretty simple, but it has worked very well for me. I've been able to get a higher rating than roughly 2/3 of the players on this site, and I'm still winning most of my games, so I don't think I've really plateaued yet. Generally, my strategy is going to be going Gin as quickly and as frequently as possible. When I say going Gin, I mean going completely out, putting all your cards in groups and sequences. The reason why I point that out is because you can actually knock early. If you're able to put most of your cards in a group or sequence, then you can get points just for doing better than your opponent. But if you're able to go completely out, then you get a 25-point bonus. So in a game to 100 points, most of your points are going to come from getting Gin a few times. You can see in this round that I'm showing, I'm pretty close to being able to go Gin because all my cards are in a group or sequence except for one. So now I pick up the Queen of Clubs and everything is in a group or sequence when I discard the Ace of Diamonds. And that's what it looks like to go completely out. I got 25 points as a bonus plus 2 points for their 2 diamonds that was left over. So now that it's the beginning of a round, my strategy is going to be to discard cards that are as unconnected as possible. So in that case, I'm discarding the 3 of Spades because it's not connected to anything for groups or sequences. The beginning of the round for me is all about maximizing my options. So picking up cards that help me and eliminating cards that help me the least. And later in the round, that's when I might start thinking about just bailing on the big point cards that I don't want them to get points for. And generally, my strategy for picking up my opponent's discard is I'm only going to pick it up if it's really helpful to me. Like if it completes a group or sequence, or if it just really helps towards multiple different things, then I'll pick up what my opponent discarded. But otherwise, I prefer to pick up from the deck because if I'm picking up a card that doesn't complete a group or sequence for me, then my opponent is going to know that, that I needed that card, so they might be less inclined to discard another card that I need. The other thing is if they're discarding cards, those are cards that are not useful to them, whereas the cards in the deck could be useful to them. So I'm generally going to take most of my cards from the deck because I just want to be going through more cards that are helpful to my opponent rather than picking up cards that aren't helpful to them. So in this case, my opponent goes Gin and I had a fair amount of leftovers, so that was a costly round for me, but still a lot of game left. And this is kind of what I was saying before. I'm choosing not to pick up the 10 of clubs because it doesn't complete a group for me, and my opponent would see that I have a 10, so they'd be less likely to give me another one. In this case, I should have picked it up because I didn't know I would immediately get the 10 of hearts next, but in general, I don't want to pick up cards that only give me 2 to something. Discarding the Ace of Diamonds because it's the only unconnected card. And now the 4 of Clubs is an interesting decision because I could choose to keep my group of 3s, or I could choose to pick up the 4 of Clubs and go for sequences. Generally, I prefer sequences to groups in this game because if you have a group, you're limited to having 3 or 4 cards in that group, and it kind of cuts off the sequences surrounding it. But by having the 4 of Clubs and having a sequence, it's like a never-ending situation where you have 2 outs on both sides. Like I could pick up the 2 of clubs and the 6 of clubs, and even if I did, I will still have 2 outs after that, like the 8 of clubs, 9 of clubs, etc. So there's a lot more potential with those. And now I'm only 1 card away from being able to go Jin. So I'm always just going to be discarding the biggest card that isn't connected, like when I just discard that Jack. And this time I'm going to discard the 7 because, regardless of what I keep, I still need 1 card, but the 7 is more points for my opponent if they go out. And my opponent goes Jin again. So they're going to get a lot of points here, but I got pretty close. And like I said, game's not over yet. Discarding the Jack of Clubs because it's the biggest card that's unconnected. Now discarding the 3 of Spades, the only unconnected card now. Again with the 3 of Hearts. And again with the Ace of Hearts. Still early in the round, so I'm still just trying to keep my options open. And now I'm going to discard the King of Diamonds. The 9 of Diamonds gives me 1 out for the 8 of Diamonds, and the Queen King of Diamonds gives me 1 out for the Jack of Diamonds. So they're all kind of equally connected, but the King and Queen are slightly bigger points, so I'm choosing to bail on those now. It's all about counting the number of outs that you have and discarding cards accordingly. Discarding the 7 because the 9 gives me a couple outs for the other 9s. The 7 of Diamonds gives me a couple straight outs. The 7 of Clubs was really the least connected card. So now I complete a sequence and I have to decide to discard the 5, the 7, or the 9. The 9 gives me 2 outs for the black 9s. The 7 of Diamonds really only gives me 1 additional out for the 6 of Diamonds, so I chose to get rid of that one. And it's a good thing I kept my 9 because, as you can see, it gave me more potential to go Jin like I am here. And that was a big catch up for me. Again, I'm passing on the 9 of Clubs because it doesn't complete a sequence for me. It's not as useful to me if they know I have it. Not picking up the 10 of Hearts either. Discarding the unconnected 10. Discarding the 8, which is the biggest unconnected card now. Now the 2 of Diamonds, which doesn't add anything for me now that I have the set of aces. And now my strategy is pretty simple, just hoping for 5s and queens. And now the nice thing about having 4 aces is that it does free up 1 for some sequence potential, but I didn't actually need it because that gives me Jin. And now I have taken the lead and it's anyone's game now. I chose to discard the queen there. The queen and the king are the same value. The king, I felt like maybe could be helpful if I picked up another jack and the queen of diamonds, but I know that ultimately I'm going to be getting rid of that most of the time. The three of clubs is an interesting decision because I don't really need it. It doesn't add a meld for me, but it does allow me to switch from a group of two to a 2-3-4 sequence and another 2-3 sequence there as well. I generally prefer sequences because they give you more outs in the long term. Just feel like there's a lot more potential there. And my opponent knocks early, so they don't get the 25-point bonus, but they do still get a few points for doing better than me. Luckily, the game is still on. And like I said, my strategy is normally trying to go Jin. There are some times that I will knock early. You're not going to see it in this video, but generally the 2 times that I will knock early are one, if I just complete 2 or 3 melds really quickly and feel like I can go out and get points for all my opponent's leftovers, which could sometimes be more than the 25-point bonus from waiting to go Jin. The other case where I might knock early is if I have very few points left over and my hand is all groups, because that's a case where each group only gives me 1 out for the remaining card in each group. And I feel like if you have groups, your opponent is probably going to have more potential to end the rounds before you. So if I had something like an ace with 3 groups, I would probably just knock and try and end the round early rather than giving my opponent time to catch up with, any sequences they might have that have more potential. My decisions so far this round have been pretty standard, just discarding my least connected cards like this one. It's a little weird having the 6 of diamonds that's part of 2 melds, but if I were able to pick up the last 6, then it would have been nice. In this case, I'm just going to stick with all my sequences, which give me a lot of outs right now. And you're seeing it again with the power of sequences. There's so many cards that help me right now. And now I'm getting really close. I'm discarding the 2 because that only gives me 1 out for the 3 of spades, whereas with the aces, there are 2 other aces. And the aces just lower points. And that is it. I am knocking, going Jin, and that is going to be the end of the game. And even though I had kind of a bad start, I managed to make a big comeback for the win. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. If you did enjoy, please like, comment, or subscribe.